Before we get started today, we just want to mention that this episode does contain discussions about medical facts and symptoms. It also talks about miscarriages and stillbirths. So if any of these things are triggers for you, or if you are super squeamish, this is probably not the episode for you. Welcome back, Pithy listeners. We are so excited to be here today. Tiny bit of housekeeping. We are on Patreon. So if you'd like to support our little podcast, that would always be amazing. We are here to bring history to life for you in the most gossipy and scandalous way possible. I think we're going to hit some of that today. But the best way, as always, is just by listening. So thank you so much for listening. Please rate and review. That would be excellent, because the more people who listen, the more Apple and Spotify, etc. promote us, the more listeners we get, which means we can bring you more episodes.
I mean, that's what Caroline says, and I say, please download and tell people about us. Please.
Yeah, that's true. Word of mouth is great. So, we are going to talk about someone whom I'm sure none of you have ever heard of.
Ever.
Henry VIII.
Who's that?
Yeah. But in case you have, I suppose he's rather famous. He ruled England for nearly 38 years. And he began his reign as the savior of his people. Handsome, charismatic, athletic, intelligent, and energetic.
Religious.
Devout. That's right.
Defender of the faith, no less.
Ooh.
That is still used. Even though they're not Catholic anymore, it's still used by the royal family today.
I find that very hard to understand, considering they did not defend that faith.
Because it was the Pope who gave it to them.
I know, they did not defend that faith. Henry represented a breath of youthful fresh air. But when he died at age 55, he was nearly unrecognizable. So, Erica, in 3 words, can you describe Henry VIII?
Large. Smelly.
Okay, so we're going with end of Henry VIII on this one.
I mean,
that's how I remember him.
He was large. Whether or not you're thinking large, like he's heavy, he was really tall. He's got those Plantagenet genes.
Yep.
Large. Smelly, because he has the, sores.
Well, just the one, the leg ulcer thing.
That's not yummy.
Nope.
He strikes me as a man who would be very hairy.
Oh, I don't know, because he's got that reddish tinge. It might be less hairy than you'd think.
It might be. I guess I'm thinking of the beard.
Okay, the beard. I'm willing to bet he didn't manscape.
Ooh, yeah.
Just thoughts.
Thoughts. He wouldn't be that considerate of any of his lovers. I don't know. He was actually very romantic in the beginning.
He was supposed to be a very generous lover, especially with Catherine. I don't know how things went downhill, but we are not discussing, we are discussing his sex life, but we're not discussing his generosity either way.
In the royal bedchamber.
There it is. All right. So, Henry at 18 wanted to make his mark on the world. He married the beautiful Spanish Princess Catherine. He yearned for glory in battle. Sometimes he'd just make up battles to make himself feel better.
Yes.
He longed for an heir and a spare, and even a few more, just for good measure. The world was his oyster. So it is my belief that he would be appalled to learn that most school children know his name because of his 6 wives. I think that his masculine vibe would really not jive with that. Most historians refer to him as a morally weak despot. I'm pretty sure he would hate that as well. And most people visualize him as a grotesquely fat man who reeked of pus.
Oh, okay, so I wasn't far off.
Not far off. Imagine Henry comes back to life and he's like, how is this what people remember? Because I don't think this is what he intended.
No, he idolized Henry V. He wanted to be that warrior prince. He was a Renaissance man, or...
He was a Renaissance man. He had his hand in everything.
A humanist. He studied with Erasmus and Thomas More. He was in the beginning of those early stages of humanism and the Renaissance, and really, in the beginning, embodied this male ideal, really.
So I have this quote by William Thomas, who was a 16th century historian who actually knew Henry. And he said, quote, Of personage, he was one of the goodliest men that lived in his time. Of countenance, he was most amiable, courteous, and benign in gesture unto all persons, and specially unto strangers. Seldom or never offended with anything, and of so constant a nature in himself that I believe few can say that ever he changed his cheer for any novelty, how contrary or sudden soever it was.
Yet so constant a nature? That is not...
Just wait, it gets better. How contrary or sudden soever it were. Prudent he was in counsel and forecasting, most liberal in rewarding his faithful servants, and even unto his enemies, as it behooveth a prince to be. He was learned in all sciences, and had the gift of many tongues. He was a perfect theologian, a good philosopher, and a strong man at arms. Thoughts?
Never so constant? He was so constant, he chopped 2 of his wives' heads off.
He was so constant.
Consistency.
Few can say that he ever changed his cheer.
Yeah, that is not the Angevin in him. Let's put it that way.
Liberal and rewarding even unto his enemies.
Not his enemies, but his favorites. I can say he
did reward. Now, when you pissed him off, you lost your head. So the question is it worth the glory?
Henry giveth, Henry taketh away.
That is how one of his contemporaries visualized him. But here is a quote from a 19th century historian, Pollard, and this is more of an overall retrospective. Quote, in the whole range of English history, there is no monarch whose character has been more variously depicted by contemporaries or more strenuously debated by posterity. To one historian, an inhuman embodiment of cruelty and vice, to another, a superhuman incarnation of courage, wisdom, and strength of will. Henry VIII has, by an almost universal consent, been placed above or below the rank of humanity.
Which is not fair, because he was human. And I think, honestly...
Yes, we will establish
this,
human.
yeah. But I think, in all fairness, if you see him as this subhuman or superhuman ideal on either side of the spectrum, of course you're going to be disappointed.
He's going to fall short no matter what.
The broken level of humanity that we all are cursed with.
I like that. Baseness of humans.
Not to get too into the theology.
In our mini Tudor arc this season, we are trying to represent the underdog, historically speaking, I think. Those who have less representation, those who deserve a more focused lens. Henry does not fall into that category.
No.
He has been covered over and over and over again. So what can we possibly say that you, the listener, haven't heard before?
Something really funny.
Obviously, yes. So I pondered this because I did want to have this kind of unique spin. And I basically just thought of the question I've been asking myself for years, since I started reading about this polarizing monarch. What the hell happened? What the hell happened?
Indeed.
How did a man, a king, on top of the world in every way, fall so spectacularly? Many historians point to a desire for a son as a driving factor in almost all of his decisions. And I think we can absolutely credit that. He definitely needed an heir. As we talked about in our Tudor Talk scene-setting episode, his father was the first of the Tudor dynasty. He was just the second. His brother had died. He felt the precariousness of his situation.
He also wasn't prepared for the throne.
No, he wasn't. He got a late start.
He was educated by Margaret Beaufort to be a cleric.
That would have not worked out well for the church. Can you imagine?
No. But maybe he would have made a great pope because he could have circled through as many women as he wanted. And he wouldn't have needed an heir.
Yeah, that would have done wonders for him, maybe.
For him, maybe not the church.
If the line had really ended with him, would it have been a dynasty at all? Or just a historical blip?
A blurb.
I think that's what he was afraid of.
Yeah.
His big thing was the heir. But I'm not satisfied with the answer of just he needed a son. And in the last 50 years, a lot of other researchers have felt this same dissatisfaction with such a singularly simple answer. Instead, I want to dig a little deeper into Henry's mental and physical state. I have combed, and I do mean combed, through laborious medical journals, listened to numerous drooling lectures, read quite a few titillating articles, and tried to sort through the speculative mud to find an answer, or at least a theory.
And it is really hard to comb through that kind of stuff and be like, how do I know this is real?
Finding information that is both historically accurate and medically sound is an intriguing challenge.
Yeah.
And there are just so many theories, and I have done my best to whittle it down to the ones that make sense. But there are two major symptoms that I want to address. Number one is his infertility, or perhaps I should say his inability to conceive healthy children. Because he could make someone pregnant, but bringing it to term was hard. And the second one is his mental health decline. Not everyone thinks he had a mental health decline. Some people think that Some people think that he was just an all-powerful king who continued on that path. But I think that there was more than that.
Yeah, you don't just cut your wife's head off and not have an issue.
Especially after you've worked for 7 years to bring about that marriage, and then within 3, gone.
But also living up to the ideal. There was no way Anne Boleyn could have been successful as a wife, partner, queen, because she can never live up to the fantasy that he made her in his head. But that's another podcast.
Fertility-wise, she's 10 years older at the end of that than when we started.
Right.
If she was a gorgeous, fertile 26-year-old, she's now a 36-year-old, and that's a big difference in terms of bearing children.
That's a geriatric pregnancy in today's terms, which is just terrible and awful, but even then, think about that. How much more difficult it would have been.
His mother didn't have much trouble conceiving children and birthing children up until the end.
None of the Woodvilles
the Woodvilles
did.
were a fertile bunch.
Yes, they were.
I think that there was definitely a need for an heir always on his mind, but beyond that, I think Henry suffered from one or more of the following medical disorders.
Oh, yay.
Syphilis, Cushing syndrome, Kell immunogenicity, gout, type 2 diabetes, myxedema, narcissistic behavior disorder, head trauma, and or genetic madness.
Anything else? Have you not run through the entire gambit yet?
No, there were other theories that just did not hold enough water to be mentioned.
Did he at least have a cauldron of mercury, like Ivan the Terrible?
There was no mention of poisoning. I know that Elizabeth I, his daughter, is thought to have suffered quite a bit from arsenic poisoning and lead poisoning based on her makeup. But I did not see anything that was like he slowly poisoned himself. No.
Oh, darn.
Unlike many of his contemporaries, he was not looking for the elixir of life.
No, but he was very hypoallergenic and would take a lot of prophylactics to try to stave off sickness.
He did, and I have a quote in here saying that he was one of the highest medical minds of his generation. He was super well learned, and he was very well read, and doctors were idiots back then and did not understand what was going on. And so I do think that Henry...
I don't know, they were able to screw an arrow out of Henry V's face. That one guy.
I find that just crazy.
Fascinating.
When the plague hit, he holed himself up for 8 weeks by himself. He wouldn't even let someone come in to bring him food. It was passed under a door. So he did seem to have some understanding of how contagion spread and how to best preserve himself. I do think that he had some intelligent thoughts on medicine.
I don't think he was unintelligent.
No, he was very smart.
It's not fair to equate mental illness and intelligence.
Nope, that's true too. But the question is, did he have a mental illness? So, as we go through this list, some of these diagnoses address both the infertility and the mental decline, while others only address one or the other. Also, I want to preface all of this with, I am not a scientist. I did love my high school biology courses, but am in no way a medical professional, which it says in our little disclaimer. So please forgive any rudimentary descriptions or slight inaccuracies. I really love WebMD. And with that lovely preface, let's investigate. First up is syphilis.
Can't wait. Love a good syphilis story.
By the way, did you know that in terms of sound alone, syphilis is considered to be one of the most pleasing words in the English language?
Where did you come up with that factoid, Caroline?
I heard it in a college lecture. It's about, like, the combination...
In what, philology?
No, the root of language and... Anyway, listen. Syphilis. You hear it, right? It just rolls off the tongue.
I mean, it's better than gonorrhea.
My aunt, she's an elementary school teacher, and she had a child named Urine. And she had another one named Chlamydia. But syphilis, it does just roll off the tongue.
No, it doesn't. Once it's there, it's stuck. It doesn't roll.
It doesn't roll away. It's forever. No, it's not anymore, but it was then.
It's not anymore. And you don't even have to take mercury now.
No, how exciting. For those of us unfamiliar with the disease, and I do very much hope that none of our lovely listeners have encountered it personally, here are the basic symptoms. First, you get a painless sore that appears on your genitals, rectum, or mouth. After that heals, a rash occurs. And then nothing. There is a dormant stage that can last for many, many years.
But you can still pass it. You can still pass it. You're not in the clear, guys.
You can still pass it. You just don't notice it yourself. And finally, the disease can affect the brain, the nerves, the eyes, or the heart. The last stage, the tertiary syphilis, can appear 10 to 30 years after your initial infection. So one of the problems with syphilis is that you just really don't know how bad it's gonna be.
Until it's real bad.
It can cause permanent organ damage and death, and complications include neurological problems, personality changes, and dementia, along with so many other fun maladies. Erica, how do you get syphilis?
You have unprotected intercourse or criminal conversations with...
Criminal conversations?
It's a Victorian phrase. Because you can't have an affair. How shocking. How could you say that word?
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, if you a hoe, you getting it.
Oh.
Excuse me, if you're a medieval
It is
hoe.
a sexually transmitted disease, as Erica said in many different euphemisms. And it was rampant in the European courts at the time of Henry VIII, especially France.
Because they all like to sleep together.
They were bored. There were no podcasts.
And what do you do without podcasts?
It was particularly tricky, as it did present itself in so many ways with greatly varying timelines and complications. So the question that we're going to talk about, could Henry have had it? Absolutely. The man had 6 marriages, though one was likely unconsummated. He also took many mistresses, mostly during periods of pregnancy for his wives, but not always, especially later on. The main reason syphilis is suggested by medical historians is Henry's fertility track record. Henry impregnated 4 women that we know of, resulting in 11 pregnancies, but only giving us 4 healthy children. In the Journal of the History of Medical and Allied Sciences, author Shrewsbury, great name, presented syphilis as the most common theory. Quote, Catherine of Aragon's record of miscarriages, stillbirths, and live births dying in infancy is indicative of acquired maternal syphilis. Therefore, Henry must have given her the disease. Therefore, he must have acquired it before their marriage.
What a turd.
What a turd to pass that on. He goes on to investigate this possibility, Shrewsbury, and basically, yes, it is very possible that prior to his first marriage, one of Henry's early sexual partners passed on the disease. Men were supposed to be kind of seasoned to know what to do come marriage.
Seasoned, not diseased.
Not diseased. It's like adding a little bit of garlic and onion powder in there.
No, garlic and onion powder is the way to go. Syphilis is not. We're gonna have to make this one explicit.
There is a small possibility that Catherine actually had syphilis before the marriage.
What?
Which is an interesting idea. Perhaps from Arthur. Shrewsbury explains that she might have had something called an elastic hymen, which wasn't ruptured. And therefore, it would have led many to believe she was still a virgin, but she wasn't. It is also possible that Arthur wasn't completely impotent, just somewhat so. There's some fun gray area in there as to what they got up to and whether or not Arthur could have passed it on. There is also a fascinating suggestion that Catherine's confessor, who did have syphilis, which may have transmitted the disease non-sexually, which I learned is a thing. Syphilis can survive up to 30 minutes on a glass, even after it was washed in cold water. So, during Mass, sharing of the sacrament, it could happen. And back then, non-sexual transmission was much more common than it is today.
Again, what a turd.
What a turd. Catherine, Poor Catherine.
This poor woman
Had a very troubled obstetric history. So most of the syphilitic thoughts about Henry and or Catherine stem from her obstetric history. Her first pregnancy resulted in a premature female stillbirth at 7.5 months. Her second was a live birth of a son, Henry, who sadly died on his 52nd day, cause unknown. Third was a miscarriage, though historical documentation is a bit iffy there. Fourth was a stillborn male. Fifth was her one successful pregnancy, Mary, born February 18th, 1516. And her final sixth pregnancy was a female stillbirth, again with questionable documentation. That's just awful.
Yeah, no joke there.
The syphilis diagnosis, either from Henry or passed on via Catherine to Henry, stems from this series of unfortunate pregnancies. But the number of dead or non-viable fetuses isn't actually indicative of syphilis. More tellingly, the sequence of her births doesn't correlate with a syphilitic mother. Additional problems include the birth of little Henry, who lived really too long to justify a maternal syphilitic diagnosis.
Right.
And of course, there's Mary, who was a healthy child. Though there is an argument that Mary could be what is called a congenital syphilitic, and that is when a fetus acquires the disease in utero. And in most cases, that disease then presents itself within 3 to 14 weeks of age. But in an extremely rare case, it can be latent and remain undiagnosed into adulthood. The characteristics of late congenital syphilis, which would be what Mary had if she was this congenital syphilitic, are bone pain and eye troubles, among others. And just to make things interesting, Mary did have notoriously bad eyesight. But otherwise, we don't have any obvious childhood or early adult illnesses, so... Early 20th century historian McLaurin claims, quote, she grew up, as one can see from her well-known portrait by Antonio Moro in the Prada, probably a hereditary syphilitic.
Okay. But as one can see? How can I see?
I was like, what can you see? So Erica, Google for me, Antonio Moro, Prado, Mary, Tudor.
Mm-hmm.
It pops right up. And can you please describe it for our lovely listeners?
You always put me on the freaking spot. She looks super angry, pale, red nose, weird chin.
Yes.
Very prominent forehead, right?
Yeah. She has like a little spot on her face. But do you see any obvious syphilitic characteristics? And I don't even know what those would be precisely from a portrait.
She's not a particularly attractive woman, but that's not a symptom.
That's not a symptom. And syphilis generally...
Getting it in your hoo-ha.
...was in the nether regions, and so I don't think they portrayed that in this portrait.
Nope, I see no hoo-ha in this picture.
I feel like maybe he was referencing smallpox because of facial blemishes, but again, she doesn't actually have any in this picture. Minus what looks to be like a mole or maybe a zit. It's a painting. Who would paint that?
Yeah, it's a painting.
They're getting paid to paint this. Don't be stupid.
Who would put that in?
In my view, while she doesn't look friendly, she also doesn't look, I don't know, scarred from sores of some sort.
No.
But again, those would have been present at the very beginning of the disease and aren't common at all for genetic syphilis. Therefore, I think McLaurin was just puffing smoke. I'm not sure what he was saying.
Syphilis in females does not present in the same way necessarily all the time that it does in males. You can go for decades without knowing.
Right.
Because you don't have any of the symptoms.
You can be one of the rare people that doesn't even have sores or a rash.
It's actually not even that rare to not have that in a woman.
Okay.
Now, men, that would be rare.
Yeah.
But for women, it's not rare. It's very common for women to go their entire lives without a diagnosis.
Just to let you know, you can go on our website, thepithychronicle.com, to see this portrait and a few others that I'm going to reference. We'd love to hear your opinion. Do you think she looks syphilitic? I don't. If Henry had syphilis, it would account for his fertility problems, though it is by no means textbook in terms of an obstetric history, and it could also answer the question of why his personality changed so drastically in the later years, because that is a pretty clear symptom, and he does seem to have had this like midlife crisis moment of like, I'm now a new person.
Well, and it's so common at the time.
It was so common at the time.
And it's Occam's razor.
Henry himself never had any documented illnesses that fit with this diagnosis, and he has a very detailed medical history. We have a lot of information about his daily ailments and when he felt better and when he didn't. There's never a report of sores or a rash. There is no mention of possible syphilis at the time, which was well known. And as I told you, he was supposed to be a great medical mind of his day, so he probably would have noticed had he had these signs, and he would have recognized them. Would he have told anyone? I don't think so.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Would he have written that down? I wouldn't have written it down.
I wouldn't have written that. No. All right. Next up, Cushing's syndrome. It is caused by the body's exposure to an excess of the hormone cortisol, which affects all the tissues and organs of the body. Most commonly today, it's caused by an overuse of cortisol medication, but I don't think we can blame it on that for him. Otherwise, it can stem from a tumor in the adrenal or pituitary glands. It has also been shown to occur after traumatic brain injuries.
Oh, like the one from jousting in 1536? Can't imagine that wouldn't be a traumatic brain injury. He almost died in that one, right?
Well, it depends. It depends which source you read. Some say it was no big deal. Some say it was harrowing. He was injured. A horse fell on him. And after this incident, he was aphasic, or basically unconscious and coma-like for about 2 hours. And it has been hypothesized that he may have suffered from frontal lobe or pituitary damage. Also, you should note that at this time he was 44 years old, married Anne, who was pregnant with a second child, and she sadly lost that child just a few days later, citing the stress of this incident.
Fair.
Cushing's disease may have been the effect of that said jousting event. Interestingly, it can sometimes be genetic, and when we look into the genetic history further on, it's definitely worth considering that this was an inherited thing. Symptoms of Cushing's are as follows. Weight gain in the face.
Which we very much see in Holbein the Younger's portraits of him.
Weight gain above the collarbone. Weight gain on the back of the neck, also known as a buffalo hump, which I think is incredibly rude. Skin changes and easy bruising, which could-ish account for his leg ulcer sore thing. A generalized weakness and fatigue. Blurred vision, vertigo, muscle weakness, menstrual disorders in women, which again makes the genetic component, if he were to have passed it on to Mary, make a lot of sense. Decreased fertility and or sex drive, which was something he had trouble with. He did not have a great libido in later years.
Towards the end, yeah.
Even though he could not admit to that. Poor wound healing. So again, that ulcerous leg, it's possible that didn't stem from Cushing's, but because of it, it got worse and worse.
Irritated.
Diabetes, severe depression, and extreme mood swings. I don't want this disease.
I don't want this disease, no. I actually have had to be tested for it because I have the moon-shaped face, and they were like, there's something wrong. And I was like, it's just my face.
Thank you so much, you rude people.
It's just my face, but thank you for thinking it's a disease.
Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty strong contender.
I really like this diagnosis. It is perhaps my favorite.
Ooh, okay.
It is not the number one. Syphilis is like the number one thing people think he had. But I think things are a-changing as we learn more about medical stuff.
I could still see him having like a touch of syphilis and something else.
It could be both.
Think about the hay that breaks the camel's back. It's not really about that hay, it's about all of the other issues. And so,
right.
It's probably more than one thing. More often than not.
More often
It's not just
than
the
not.
one thing.
We know a lot about Henry's weight in particular because of the suits of armor that are still housed in the Tower of London. His size changed dramatically. Henry was 6 feet 2 inches tall, which was very tall for the time. Like we said in our Tudor episode, he probably inherited this from his grandfather, Edward IV, who was said to be 6'4" and a very handsome man indeed.
Blonde with blue eyes.
Man Crush Monday. Yes, please. At age 23, his chest circumference was 42 inches and his waist was 35. Today, the average chest circumference is between 38 and 42 inches, so he fits there. And the average waist is 40.2. So he was actually of a slim, muscular build.
My husband wears a size 34 in his britches, so an inch bigger.
Does he refer to them as britches as well?
No, of course not. It's only me.
It's only you. All of this correlates with the accounts of his athletic prowess and fine figure. But oh, how the mighty do fall. By age 50.
Or rise.
Or expand. By age 50, his chest was now 57 inches. That is a gain of 15 inches. And his waist was 54. That is 19 inches bigger.
Wow.
He weighed nearly 29 stone, or roughly 400 pounds.
Oh my gosh. Like, I knew he was big, but
400
that's a big
pounds.
boy.
Yes. Based on a very scientific scale that I found online, anything over 233 pounds at his height is considered obese. With current measurements, his BMI is 51.35. A BMI today over 24.9 is considered overweight, and anyone over 40 is labeled morbidly obese. I do want to say that this is in no way a comment on weight or a type of body shaming. All this is a representation of facts and figures. He is larger than the scientific community says is healthy, period space. But what it does show us is that Henry at 23 was in good shape and an athletically fit person. But at 50, he was morbidly obese and struggled to walk.
But let's cut the man some slack a little bit. Not a lot, but a little bit, because aren't we all really fabulous at 23 and then, like, maybe a little less fabulous at 50?
That's true. Decade down the line, I'm going to say that 23 was better than 34 for me.
I mean, I got that glow up after the baby, but
I did not.
Not everyone's so lucky.
I did not get a glow up. Oh my lord. Let's look at his famous portrait by court painter Hans Holbein.
The younger.
The younger, thank you. The man looks very top-heavy. He has shapely calves, oh so sexy.
Which he was super obsessed with.
Like Louis XIV, who we will discuss in our episode on Versailles. Yes, he was obsessed with his calves. He thought they were amazing. But honestly, in this picture, I don't see that his calves could support his massive middle. Holbein tries to hide this bulk under robes of fur and velvet and copious amounts of royal jewels, but it is clear he is round. His face, too, is very round, despite trying to hide it with a beard.
Moon-like.
Moon-like. So beyond his weight, it's also well documented that Henry almost completely lost his sight at the end of his life.
Probably diabetes, right?
We're not at the diabetes diagnosis. Just hold your horses.
Sorry.
But Cushing's also has a sight issue. He had to give up signing documents 2 years before his death, and he ordered spectacles from Germany 10 at a time. So he either lost them a lot, or he had one for every room.
Broke them a lot.
Broke them a lot. He probably just sat on them. I said that, yes. He also had bouts of extreme fatigue. He required a tram, which was...
Same, Henry.
Which was a special chair supported by 6 sweaty attendants to carry him around for the last few years. And he also had a rudimentary lift installed to get him from the ground floor to his first floor apartments.
He also had a thing to get up on the horse, too, right?
He had some sort of a system to get up on his horse. Among his personal possessions, there were 3 very fancy walking staves with whistles on top, which are indicative that he needed assistance to get around, and if he were to fall down, he would be unable to get up and therefore had to whistle for help.
I knew he was in bad shape, but whoa.
The end was really bad, and he really didn't want people to write about it for obvious reasons.
Right.
So it was not generally broadcast to the other courts.
Sure.
Cushing's syndrome also addresses his fertility issues and his decreased sex drive, something that seems to have plagued him later in life. Top that off with severe depression and extreme mood swings, and to me, you have yourself a tyrannical despot who struggles with libido and fertility, gains a ton of weight, gets angry at the drop of a hat, and generally changes personality as he ages.
This fits.
This fits.
It's a good walk-in shoe. That's how it feels.
I like that. If the glove fits.
Would love to point out, though, whatever the cause was, I know I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but I mean, it's easy to see the correlation between a libido shrink
literally getting smaller as you speak. Yes.
In correlation with weight gain, because not only if he's, as they say, morbidly obese, it's harder to...
I mean, the man could not be on top. Let's just state that.
Well, yeah, the act of intercourse is not for the faint of heart. If you have a heart condition, you can't do it. So I can't imagine if you're 400 pounds, how difficult it could be at 50, and not to mention all the other maladies you've got going on. So I can...
Not to mention.
So anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree. Also, it just takes away from your personal sense of confidence, and that affects too. So some historians that I read are 100% certain that he suffered from Cushing's syndrome, but it is pretty rare. So that's kind of...
Listen, I'm not going to be 100% sure about anything until I get a blood test, and that's not happening.
No, I think we should make a petition to figure this out. Dig up those darn bones. Get with it.
Yeah.
You don't need to confirm that he's related to Elizabeth. Just find out what is going on with him.
Inquiring minds want to know.
It could either have been genetic or from a head trauma, as I said, but others have dismissed it pretty quickly, claiming that the head trauma was not nearly severe enough, and that within a few weeks he went right back to hunting and writing and was pretty vigorous.
Okay, yes, but, and this is cited in your earlier thing, he's a megalomaniac.
He is.
He believes, honestly and truly, that he's got to present this virile, nothing can stop me facade. Of course he's back to being vigorous and hunting.
Or at least made people write that down.
Sure, right.
He rode, but he didn't, ride. I really like it. I think the genetic aspect is really interesting. Tumors that gave him fertility issues in his 20s and continued to plague him with a myriad of other symptoms as he aged makes a lot of sense to me. And perhaps it was something that he passed on to Mary, who also had the eye trouble and the fertility issues, as well as the significant weight gain later in life. But could just as easily stem from the head trauma at age 44. When the trauma occurred, Henry had 3 healthy children. Yes, things with Catherine had not gone well, but his mistress, Bessie Blount, had delivered a son, and both Anne and Catherine had a healthy daughter. Additionally, at that time, he was still a physically fit man at 44. He had not ballooned. His armor at the time shows that he had really gained very little weight since 25. It wasn't until a few years later that everything just became so extreme. So I like that one too. Which leads me to our third diagnosis, the X-linked genetic disorder called Kell immunogenicity.
Yes, give me that Kell antigen. I mean, don't give me the Kell antigen, but I know where this one is coming from, and I'm ready to talk about this one.
Let's talk about Kell alleles. This diagnosis, just to clarify, does not address his weight gain or his mental deterioration, but it does talk about his ability to have children. So therefore, it could easily be combined with Cushing's or any of the myriad other options.
Or just the really, really fatty menu at the Tudor court.
The man loved his meat. He ate more meat daily than most people had in a month.
Yeah.
He ate so much meat. Not that meat is bad, but red meat, especially over time, blah, blah, blah. All right, the Kell allele is similar to the ABO blood groups, specifically in terms of compatibility. If, God forbid, Erica was in some sort of a traumatic accident or had some sort of an injury, you would then perhaps, Erica, need a blood transfusion. But you can't have any blood. You need compatible blood. For example, if you are AB positive, you either need AB positive or O positive blood. If you are B negative, you need B negative or O negative. If you are the unlucky O negative, nothing but O negative will do, and I'm allowed to say this because that's what I got. So, the Kell allele.
I'm a plain old A.
Pos or neg?
I don't know. A.
Oh, good Lord.
I think
She's
positive.
A. It's more common to be positive. Be positive in life, folks. So the Kell allele is a similar idea. Think back to your high school days of arranging Punnett squares to determine what your future children's eye color could be. You could either be K1 dominant or K2 recessive. K1 is an immunogen that generates red blood cell antibodies, leading to hemolytic disease of a newborn or the transmission of incompatible blood. K2 doesn't. Just for some numbers here, 91% of the Caucasian population, and I reference this race only because this is what applies to Henry, his wives, and his mistresses. 91% is homogeneous K2, which means they are Kell negative. 0.2% of the Caucasian population is fully K positive, having 2 big K1 alleles. And 8.8% are heterozygous, meaning they have one of each.
Lucky them?
No, not so much. For this theory to stick, Henry would need to fall in this last category as the heterozygous with one Kell allele with one K1 and one K2. A Kell negative female, which is 91% of the population available to Henry for procreation at the time, fertilized by a Kell positive or a Kell heterozygous male, could develop antibodies against a second or subsequent fetuses, leading to a possible miscarriage, stillbirth, or early neonatal death. Here's the synopsis. If Henry had one of each, he could then have had a healthy child at any time, to include Catherine's 5th pregnancy, Mary, who would then have the good fortune to inherit from her father this recessive K2 gene, which is statistically possible but not probable. But more than likely, he would only have a healthy child with a woman if it was her first pregnancy. So there is the possibility of this later pregnancy working out, but it's pretty improbable. But he would very easily have a healthy pregnancy the first time round with a partner. So that would include Bessie Blount, Jane Seymour, and Anne Boleyn. But all subsequent pregnancies would be at high risk for miscarriage, stillbirth, etc.
Right, which makes sense. Yes.
Sorry, this is a lot of science.
No, it totally makes sense. Obviously, Catherine is the outlier here.
Right.
But Anne, all of her subsequent pregnancies were miscarriages or stillbirths.
Yeah.
Jane Seymour died, so we don't know. And Bessie Blount was sent away with Henry Fitzroy,
So that one and done, exactly. Basically, Anne, Jane, and Bessie, as you said, all fit this mold. But Anne particularly had a very healthy first pregnancy and thereafter suffered miscarriages and maybe even a stillbirth. So she is textbook. Catherine is less so, but it still works if you consider that small statistical possibility of an inherited recessive gene, which means that Mary could have survived. I've also read a few theories that perhaps Catherine might have used a sperm donor out of desperation.
Catherine and
So I highly doubt it based on her sincere Catholic beliefs, but desperate times she might have decided maybe it's not me? ? Maybe once Henry Fitzroy showed up, she was like, I have to fix this. I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
So in conclusion, Henry's parenthood does generally fit with this idea of the Kell theory incompatibility, meaning that his blood type was incompatible with 91% of the English populations at the time, which is not great odds.
No, that is not good odds. Where do they think? Oh, I know this. I know where he inherited this from. Can I say it?
Yes, if he had it, I want to put in there.
If.
Again, we don't know that he inherited it, but if he inherited it, Erica, who could it have been from?
Jacquetta of Luxembourg.
Well done. Jacquetta Woodville, in the end.
Fine.
His maternal great-grandmother. Ironically, she was actually accused of being a witch more than once.
Oh, and convicted.
Oh, that's a very valid point. And convicted. And they believe that perhaps she cursed her enemies. I'm not going to go into all the unnecessary details, in part because we've already talked a lot about it in the Tudor Talk episode. But she herself had 7 sons, none of which had any children that we know of. To have 7 sons who seem incapable of procreating, some due to death, some due to the fact that they were married to geriatric women.
Sorry, that's a role reversal.
One of her sons was married to a 65-year-old. Give him an in at court after Elizabeth Woodville married Edward IV.
That is interesting.
That was very interesting. So that's not his fault. But 3 of them were married and produced no offspring.
Fascinating.
Maybe, in some sort of a twisted way, she did curse the Tudor dynasty inadvertently. It's interesting to note that she is, in fact, the ancestor of every English monarch since Henry VIII. And looking at the reproductive issues of the monarchy as a whole, it does kind of fit.
Jacquetta of Luxembourg, fascinating woman. Absolutely.
We should do an episode.
Don't tempt me with a good time.
Done.
Done. Okay.
Should I bat an eye?
No.
No.
No, because then it'll be done. I have to finish my other episodes.
Fine. So far, we have covered syphilis, Cushing's syndrome, and Kell immunogenicity. These are pretty much the top 3. And now we're going to go through some other options, some extras, some add-ons, fellow travelers, if you will, that could have come with all these things.
I love a good side.
I love a good side. Next up is gout.
The rich man's disease.
Henry VII, Henry VIII's father, definitely suffered from gout. Henry VIII likely did as well, but he was never diagnosed as such. Gout is a relatively common form of inflammatory arthritis and can be very painful.
Yeah.
Usually it affects one joint at a time, and symptoms flare up and then go into remission. As Erica said, rich man's disease because it occurs in people who have sumptuous diets that include lots of red meat and seafood, as well as excessive alcohol. All of this fits lovely Henry VIII. The King of England, ordained by God, who loved meat and ate more of it than anyone else in his entire country, and who washed it down with loads of wine and spirits. Yes, it fits, not to mention the genetic inclination, and it is a genetic disease, to some extent. You're more prone. Gout not only causes joint pain, but it can cause kidney problems, which is believed to be a major cause of Henry's final demise. And it can result in physical deformity and mobility issues.
There's really no doubt in my mind that he suffered from gout, especially at the end. It's just too common of a disease, especially with the hereditary sensitivity to it already.
I think we can pretty much assume that the man had gout.
Right.
The question really is whether or not that leg ulcer, which we've talked about, might have been from gout or exacerbated by gout.
Gout can produce an ulcer.
Yes.
In a very extreme case.
Exactly. Then the other question is whether or not this gout, or perhaps the leg ulcer, might have affected his mental change. Shrewsbury, who I've talked about earlier, believes that gout, quote, seems an adequate explanation for the change from the handsome, athletic, magnificent young prince of the Renaissance to the suspicious, jealous, lonely old despot. He points out that gout's accompanying pain, rising blood pressure, and depression sprinkled with a bit of Henry's basic egotistical self-love, and therefore mortification at what he had become, easily explains the entire shift in the man's personality.
I mean, that's a whole-ass statement.
It is a whole-ass statement. I knew you'd like that one. Mortification and what he had become.
And you know what? Fair. I'm sure he had a lot of self-hate. And I think a lot of the duality of him as a man is because he had to present such
confidence.
Yeah, such a curated facade, and then the internal just absolute self-loathing. And I think too often we look for this bigger, rare thing or this disease, and it could be, but honestly, people today, because we don't have that same type of chronic pain, common chronic pain with people, we seem to discount what chronic pain does to your mental health.
I completely agree. I think it's a fair assessment. So basically, at the end of Shrewsbury's article, he's like, yeah, the man had gout. And that sucks. Too bad for him.
Great.
Go
Shrewsbury!
It is a valid option. It might not be one of these rare genetic things. Could just be the man had a really painful life. I do think it is remarkably sad when you think about what Henry wanted to be, what he thought he was, and I think what he was in the beginning to what he ended up with. It's a good lesson in humility. That must have been a real hard fall from grace.
It is, but also to quote Batman, which my husband is going to love me for, you either die the hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And I think that really sums up Henry VIII. He had this potential and vigor, and then...
Honestly, that sums it up. I love it.
He is categorized even worse than his father. You know, he's not even this miser who's doing things for his country. He's seen as a lecher and angry and crazy. We can see a very distinct correlation, too, with our Ivan the Terrible episode, because he, too, there was a point in his life that if he would have died as a young man, he would have been lauded as this great figure. So speaking of Russians, what is next on our little illness Russian roulette?
Type 2 diabetes.
Well, that's not glamorous, and usually if you have one, you've got the other. They're kind of hand in glove, right?
Yes, not always, but there's definitely a documented link. It is believed that his maternal grandfather, Edward IV, also suffered from type 2 diabetes. Edward, like his grandson, and I do think this is fascinating, was once handsome and athletic, but he too fell into obesity through the indulgence of his middle age. We don't hear that as much about Edward, which I think is really interesting. Probably because there was just so much chaos in his reign in terms of who was actually king at the time. But
So I actually knew that, but by the end of his life, it was relatively peaceful, so he didn't have to go out warring and killing folks. I mean, so what are you gonna do? You're gonna sit on your bottom and eat pigeon cake or whatever the heck they eat?
pigeon cake.
Spotted dick, as you say?
It's a dessert. I'm not making this up. British listeners, help me out.
Listen,
I know you know what
we just
this
need
is.
more spotted dick in this episode.
Yes? I think that's exactly what it is. Obviously, we don't know what killed Edward IV, but that didn't help.
I think it pretty well explains Edward IV's death at 40.
If Henry or his grandfather Edward had type 2 diabetes, they would not have recognized it as such.
No, it was called sugar sickness.
Sugar sick, is that what it was called? I did not know that.
Speaking of urine, do you want to know how they would test it?
How?
The practitioners would have to drink samples of morning urine to see if it was sugary.
Ew. Whose job was that?
Same with medical dogs. They would train it to sniff or taste excess sugar in the urine.
There were medical dogs in the Tudor era?
I don't know that it was the Tudor era, but
But by the Victorian era, I could see that, yeah.
when I saw it documented, it was the 1700s.
Well, I think a change of diet would have helped both of these gentlemen out a lot.
Yes.
But there is no documentation that either of them decided to cut back on their yummy stuff.
All right, so what's up next?
Myxedema.
Oh, okay. I know none of what that is.
I think you actually do because you've kind of referenced it with the hypothyroidism.
Ooh, tell me more.
According to WebMD, which again, I must say, was incredibly helpful for this episode. I should also add that searching WebMD, it's similar to going to medical school. Not in that you know everything. Please do not think that WebMD makes you a doctor. But it can cause serious cases of hypochondria. You can just ask my husband. This is a true story. One time, my wonderful, intelligent, super educated husband decided that he had cancer based on a pain in his knee when he was lifting weights at the gym. Like, what?
Oh,
You are too smart for this!
no. Here's one. I have been sick, terribly sick my entire pregnancy, and I'm finally getting some relief with a C-section. Thank you, medical science. So I am quite literally on the table, cut open, and the doctor to my husband says, "Would you like to take a look? You're not going to faint or anything, are you?" And he says, as serious as one possibly could say, "I have a degree in biology. I'm fine."
It's totally the same as seeing my wife cut open on the table.
He didn't faint. He absolutely
He
kept-
looked?
I was so mad because I specifically said, "You stay your butt above that curtain."
Shoulders and up, dude. Shoulders and up.
I was so mad. But you know what? At the end of the day, he thought it was fascinating. He loved the whole life-giving aspect. I guess that's fine.
That's fine. To the doctors among us who like WebMD / those of us with degrees in biology.
No, do not give him that credit.
Nah.
No.
All right, back to the ailment at hand. Myxedema is, quote, the swelling of the skin and underlying tissues giving a waxy consistency typical of patients with underactive thyroid glands, generally associated with hypothyroidism, weight gain, mental dullness, and sensitivity to cold.
Mental dullness.
The thyroid gland, believe it or not, makes the thyroid hormone. And that can sometimes be underactive and produce too little thyroid hormone. Lots of people today are diagnosed with this, either overactive or underactive, both of which manifest in various symptoms. But for our purposes today, hypothyroid or myxedema may have caused Henry's weight gain, his mental dullness, and his constipation, which was something that plagued our poor Henry. Talk about affecting your libido. Evidently, rhubarb was his only relief.
Huh. Rhubarb jelly. That's great for the morning. Get you started off right.
There you go. I think rhubarb pie.
But yeah, okay, rhubarb pie.
There's rhubarb pie.
Probably, yeah.
Based on Great British Bake Off, I've seen a few. a rhubarb pudding.
Yeah, with spotted dicks.
Before we move on to the next malady for Henry, I found a super fascinating theory about Anne Boleyn and hyperthyroidism. So the opposite of Henry's possible problem.
Oh my God, tell me everything.
I know this is a rabbit hole, but it's so worth it. This is a medical episode, it's fine. As you may or may not know, there is no confirmed portrait of Anne Boleyn, but there is a Holbein sketch in the Royal Collection at Windsor described as, quote, a lady of no very attractive appearance, which has the subscription Anna Boleyn Queen printed above it. Holbein came to the English court at the same time that Anne was becoming queen, so it does make sense that he would have sketched her, and it's possible that he planned to paint her.
Or perhaps even did, and we just don't have it.
Yeah, it could be that her downfall and beheading stopped the portrait, or maybe even meant the portrait was destroyed. But this sketch, if it's Anne, I'd like you to describe it. What do you see?
It honestly looks like when she's about to go get her head chopped off.
Yeah, it does. I can see that.
I thought she had dark hair. It looks kind of reddy blonde here.
It does, but the argument is that just the wording on the top says Anne Boleyn, but also she has dark eyes, which were very uncommon at the time, and so
that's true.
I think maybe the hair was something that was just there.
Well, I know that you get this little hangy situation under, not their jowl, but almost like
a double
chin when you have thyroid issues, and which she has. And she does have a very oval face. It's not what you think of when you see Anne Boleyn.
No, it's not. So something that I think a lot of people don't realize because of a lot of Hollywood's representation is that Anne Boleyn was not said to be a beautiful woman.
No, in no account.
At all. And in this sketch, which again will be on our website, it shows a woman with a long, slender neck and what looks to be a very serious double chin. It is noticeable. And if you were going to make an official portrait...
The chin is already down.
It's either exaggerated, which why would you do that?
Listen, if I'm having a portrait, I'm going to do this.
I'm going to lift, yeah. And if you're a portrait artist...
Why would you do
and
this?
Holbein knew this. You don't highlight unattractive features. And so the fact that it's put in there seems representative. So big if this is meant to be the official portrait, not flattering. And while we know that Henry was utterly besotted with Anne, contemporary reports are also unflattering. Ambassador Eustace Chapuis referred to her, I know,
love him.
Eric is so excited, referred to her as, quote, a thin old woman, while Nicholas Sanders claimed that she had, quote, a large wen under her chin.
And she does.
Thus we see it. But Nicholas Saunders evidently had nothing nice to say about anyone, so...
And neither did Chapuis. He called her the Great Concubine.
Yeah, he did not like her at all. But to be fair, he was a Catherine person. So if this is Anne, it is then possible that the enlarged chin area was due to an ulcer, could be syphilitic, which I want to throw that out there because that puts our whole syphilis debate into a tailspin. But it is very possible, and I have seen it argued that Anne got syphilis at court in France. Anne was there for quite a while. She was French in every way. Could include premarital relations. There's nothing that says Henry would have been totally against that, if you know what I mean, because he did take mistresses, and originally Anne was meant to be a mistress, like her sister, so it is possible.
And potentially even her mother.
Oh God, I heard about that. Yes, potentially Henry also took the mother to bed. We do know that the French court at the time was swarming with syphilis. It's also possible that she got it from a non-sexual contact, like we talked about earlier. But more than likely, this lump could be a goiter from hyperthyroidism, which means too much thyroid hormone. And this could actually explain a number of things.
It also could be just an iodine goiter because they oversalted that food.
That's true, it could be. But hold on, my thyroid thing is really fun.
Sorry, go ahead.
If it was hyperthyroidism, the loss of her second child would make a lot more sense. Actually, she could have developed said hyperthyroidism during her first pregnancy. That's kind of a common thing. That would make sense that Elizabeth came out and then she got this, and then every birth after that would have had preterm or a low birth weight for baby.
Which totally explains the subsequent 2 pregnancies.
A further symptom of hyperthyroidism is bulging eyes, which she was described as a goggle-eyed whore by contemporaries. The whore bit we can take out, but the goggle-eyed helps us. Dame Maggie Smith, the amazing actress forever my Professor McGonagall. She suffers from hyperthyroidism. She has Graves' disease. And if you look at a photo of her, you will see what I mean by bulging eyes. She also, sadly, has this little goiter thing.
Goddess among women still.
Goddess among women. And in no way is this a negative, it's just a very different look. Anne was described as having this odd look. This kind of fits. Furthermore, John Lingard, a 19th century Catholic priest and historian who wrote the History of England, claims, quote, "The king must have been impelled by some most powerful motive to exercise against Anne such superfluous vigor. Had his object been, we sometimes are told that it was, to place Jane Seymour by his side on the throne, the divorce of Anne without her execution, or the execution without the divorce, would have effected his purpose. But he seems to have punished her with insatiable hatred." So maybe his paranoia got the better of him, and he saw the goiter, and he watched her deliver these 2 premature children, and he decided that she was sick, or worse, perhaps cursed. Henry is quoted after saying goodnight to his illegitimate son, Henry Fitzroy, quote, "The Duke and his sister, the Lady Mary, might thank God for having escaped the hands of that damned poisonous wretch who had conspired their death." It is possible that Henry thought she would infect the rest of his family, either with syphilis or some unknown disease. Maybe he saw this hypothyroidism happening. He saw the development of it, he saw the results, and he didn't know what it was. So he murdered her because she'd become a witch to him.
Well, daggum.
It's a messy theory. It's a very messy theory.
It's a messy theory, but I see it.
But it's a very unattractive portrait. It is not flattering.
But Holbein was known to, his first drafts were not what people liked.
That's true.
His second drafts were what endures.
A lot of the portraits that you see of Henry by Holbein, he was originally shorter, but still same squatness. And so those lovely calves that we see have been exaggerated by Holbein because Henry was like, I'm taller than that.
My hands aren't that small.
My codpiece is bigger.
Speaking of...
Next, we have narcissistic behavior disorder. Basically, it is a mental condition in which people have an inflated sense of their own importance, a deep need for excessive attention and admiration, troubled relationships, and a lack of empathy for others.
And it describes almost every king we've ever covered.
Pretty much. They were all related. It's possible they all had narcissistic behavior disorder. But especially as we discussed in our Tudor Talk episode, Henry's ancestor, Richard II, was thought to have possibly suffered from this.
Right.
But it's real vague. I don't know how a king at this time, with divine right of kings and the exaggerated differences between the monarchy and literally everybody else, but especially the peasants, I don't know how he couldn't have thought he was God's gift to this world.
Yeah, fair. I mean, not fair, but fair.
So next, the traumatic head injury. We've talked about how this could have brought on Cushing's syndrome, but it could also have just been a thing by itself.
Yeah, brain damage.
This is one of the most commonly held beliefs, just brain damage. Yeah, 1536, jousting, he suffers this head trauma, he's unconscious for a couple of hours. Anne Boleyn miscarried just 9 days later. At this point, as we said, Henry is in his prime, he's got lots to live for, but quote, "On the eve of the conversion of St. Paul," which was January 17th, I had to look it up, "the king mounted on a great horse to run at the lists. Both fell so heavily that everyone thought it was a miracle he was not killed." That's from Chapuis. After this accident, his behavior suddenly changed almost instantly, according to some sources. Many historians theorize that this is a one-and-done instance that altered Henry and his dynastic future forever. Based on his actions, this was seemingly where things started to go off the deep end. And of course, then you can add to that he just lost a premature baby boy with the wife that he'd been looking for. I mean, you could see how this would have affected him mentally.
It's a lot of trauma in 2 weeks.
Medically, he might have experienced frontal lobe damage, which is now known as post-traumatic stress disorder. And this part of the brain, when damaged, can lead to a complete change of personality. Conversely, he might have damaged his pituitary gland, which causes growth hormone deficiency and could explain his excessive weight gain. On its own, it doesn't exactly explain all of his actions, but if you consider that this excessive weight gain would then have altered his manly physique and stature, it would have jolted his opinion of himself and could have deeply affected his personality.
I mean, what about these football players who get concussions and kill their wives?
So if it was a frontal lobe damage, it would make sense that it altered his personality. But if it was just a pituitary gland damage, it probably wouldn't have changed his personality. It would have been more just the weight gain.
Right. But I definitely think...
You can see it. It makes sense.
If we see it happening today, it's not like things were that much different back then. You're still having that head trauma and jousting.
Jousting with helmets, but not padded helmets.
But they're metal.
Yeah.
They're metal.
It was only really to protect your eyesight.
Which sucked in the end anyway.
Jousting is a lot like football, I think. I can totally see the injury correlation there.
Sure.
You know what I mean. Like the injury.
I do.
All right. We have 2 more options. We're almost there.
Oh my god. Okay.
There are so many choices, and I did not include them all.
It's fine. I know I had my rabbit hole episode. You go right ahead, girl. You do your thing.
McLeod syndrome. Have you ever heard of it?
Nope, don't know.
It is a genetic disorder that results from a variety of recessive mutations or deletions, something that is more likely to occur in people whose DNA is all twisted up via incest and inbreeding.
I'm shocked that incest and inbreeding has actual consequences.
No.
What?
The symptoms usually develop in midlife, which fits,
Fits.
and commonly affect the nervous system, heart, and blood vessels. Pathological symptoms include psychoses, behavioral changes, dementia, seizures, movement disorders, muscular dystrophy, and the list goes on and on. But here, we can certainly conjecture that Henry might have had psychoses. He certainly seems to have lost touch with reality at times during his later life. He also clearly had a certain amount of paranoia, and it would also explain his personality change. In terms of physicality, he had mobility issues in later life. Could this have been muscular dystrophy? Probably not. His chronic leg pain argues against some sort of a sensory neuropathy. He did have this gaping, oozing wound. It wasn't a just misfiring nerve. But it is listed as a possibility, and it does seem like it's a good fit-ish. All right, moving on.
I feel like there's been better.
I have had so many choices, I don't like this one. All right, last but not least.
Boo-hoo.
It is, in fact, my favorite. It's just pure crappy genetics.
Yeah, that might be my favorite, too, because wow, wow, wowie, wow.
And again, some of these symptoms are genetic. Let's just be real. Henry's family tree is a hot flippin' mess. He had a host of possible genetic mutations in his familial DNA. Let's look at a few options, shall we?
I mean, he was descended from the devil, of course. Go.
He was descended from the devil. That's... Great-great-grandpa Charles VI of France, Charles the Mad, had a glass delusion, believing his body could easily break from even the smallest bump.
Absolutely sane. I don't know what you're talking about.
His great-great-uncle, brother to his great-grandfather, was Henry VI, who also went mad, leading to his overthrow and eventually the death of his son Edward and then himself. So this little bout of madness, or rather this big bout of madness, pushed Henry's one relative off the throne to then install his maternal grandfather on it.
Yeah. Very twisted here.
So much. Looking after Henry, we also find madness in his genealogy, so perhaps he passed it on. George III, Mad King George, dude who lost the American colonies, definitely had periods of insanity, which are briefly shown in Bridgerton, should you be so inclined. It is widely believed that George III suffered from porphyria, which is an inherited condition.
Didn't he also have a little bit of glass delusion, or am I just making that up?
I don't think so. I can see where you'd get that.
With the porphyria.
He definitely had to be in straitjackets at times, but the porphyria itself was just a loss of touch with reality. Margaret Tudor, sister to Henry VIII, Mary Queen of Scots, Henry's great niece, and her son, King James VI, or the First, depending on your viewpoint, are also conjectured to have possibly suffered from porphyria.
Fascinating. Would that maybe have been more from the Stuart line, though?
It could be. Yeah, I mean, who knows where this could come from? We can't point to Jacquetta like we could to the Kell. But let's see. There's also depression. There's depression, bipolar disorder, or schizophrenia, which are all seemingly in his family's medical history. Basically, it's everything but the kitchen sink.
Yeah. Like,
Let's wrap this up because this has been a lot of information just thrown at people. Erica, what is your favorite choice? Favorite theory?
Honestly, realistically, okay, I have two things.
Go.
I think what is most likely is that he just suffered from the chronic pain, and I think that led to his mental incapacitation or his mood swings and the personality shifts.
Mm-hmm.
I think that had more to do with it than any one thing. I think that the smaller theories are probably the most likely. If you're ascribed to the Occam's razor theory, most common is most likely or what have you. But my favorite, the salacious one, of course I want to think that someone was descended from the devil and his grandmother or great-grandmother was a witch and cursed her family line. That makes for a good story.
Salaciously, I think the syphilis is fun. And my favorite one was that Catherine got it from her confessor via a non-sexually just totally random. Actually, no, my favorite salacious one would be that she got it from Arthur and that lady lied.
Mm-hmm.
And I can understand why she would have lied. She was stuck there.
Heck yeah.
I totally get that. So it's very possible. No, it's not very possible. That's my favorite. That it was syphilis and that Catherine gave it to him because of Arthur. But that's really unlikely.
Yeah.
I personally think that it was the gout and the diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
But I also like the idea of the head trauma. And maybe it's not only head trauma, as you say. Maybe it is head trauma which kind of affected him, but then the rest of it just took its toll.
Well, it usually and most likely is never one thing. It is a compilation of things over time.
No.
And I think that's probably the most likely summation you can make. I can't imagine the mental anguish of bearing so much potential on your shoulders to carry a kingdom, be this prince of the Renaissance, and then turn into this
monster.
Not even that. I don't even know that he was necessarily... He was a monster, but a mediocre ruler. Placed with such great expectation to only be met with mediocrity.
Well, I mean, he kept trying to take France back, and it just never really worked. But he did seem to have lofty goals, especially in the warrior realm. That while he might have been athletic, it doesn't mean that he's going to be a great warrior.
Or tactician, yeah.
Or tactician, or that his kingdom is capable of taking on the greatest power at the time. That's part of it, too.
Right.
You can be great, but you got to have a whole kingdom behind you. One king, one individual is not going to change a nation's fate in terms of war.
Well, and I do know he did have those lofty ideals. He commissioned very large paintings and frescoes of Agincourt. If ever there was a Henry V superfan, it was him.
It was him.
Other or not he had a good relationship with his father, he respected him so much for his prowess in battle. Now, he had a lot of other disagreements with him and a lot of difficulties, but he admired the fact that he came in and took by force what was rightfully his.
But I think he also he was slightly embarrassed. Not embarrassed, but he was concerned that his father was kind of an upstart.
Yes.
His genealogy was there, but Dad was an upstart. Mom was probably, frankly, more queenly. Elizabeth of York was trained for the position to be actually the French queen. That didn't work out for her. And she was raised to be a queen consort, and she was absolutely fantastic. She did it all, by the book.
She is probably one of the most perfect examples of a queen consort because, and this is sad, but there's remarkably little about her, and that's why she was so fabulous, because she exercised her power in such a way that it was so acceptable to do at that time as a woman behind the scenes in a feminine way, working through her husband for her children.
Exactly. Anyway, that, my friends, is that. We're thinking of circulating a petition to have Henry's remains genetically tested. After all, what is the point of science if we don't use it? But in the end, would that ruin everything by having a definitive answer? Is the mystery just more fun? I don't know.
I like having a definitive answer, and even if it's definitive, there's still going to be people coming around with new theories.
Fair enough.
You can't kill a good conspiracy theory.
No, you can't. Did you know the Earth is flat?
For better or for worse.
Flat earthers, oh my god. With that, I'm Caroline.
And I'm Erica, and we are Pithily Yours.
This episode is brought to you by the Pithy Chronicle, LLC. The Pithy Chronicle is intended for education, entertainment, and non-commercial purposes. Any views or opinions expressed in this podcast are personal and do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations that the owner may or may not be associated with in a professional or personal capacity. While we offer lots of sarcasm, this podcast does not offer any advice or services. Listening to this podcast may induce fits of laughter, unexpected distraction, or uncontrollable rage at the subjects, hopefully not at us. We hope you learned something today. If not, so sorry. Please be advised we are not experts in the following fields: medical, legal, financial, technological, thermonuclear engineering, submarine warfare, neuroscience, or cat husbandry. Thanks for listening to our little disclaimer. Just covering our history-loving asses. Bye!